Imagine this. 140 years ago, Fiji was completely devoid of Indian people and cultures. Yet today, over 48% of the Fijian population are Indians. How did this happen? Where did all these Indians come from? And why did they choose to live in Fiji, so far away from their homeland? Was it smooth sailing for Indians to live in Fiji? Or are there dark, hidden secrets in their history that led them here? You probably have all these questions and more floating in your mind, and so do we. After all, Indians becoming the largest ethnic group and having a population of over 400,000 in Fiji is a lot to take in. That's why we'll uncover everything there is to know about Indo-Fijians in this video. But before we dive deep into unraveling this mystery, please hit the subscribe button and share this with your friends. It really encourages us to work harder and bring you entertaining content every week. That said, let's tackle our first question. Where is Fiji? Situated about 1,100 nautical miles northeast of New Zealand, Fiji is a paradise island nation consisting of 333 picturesque islands. The country is bursting at the seams with lush tropical landscapes, pristine beaches, stunning coral reefs, and volcanic terrain. No corner of this land is less than picture perfect, and thanks to that, Fiji's tourism pulls in over $358 million of revenue every year. Apart from tourism, the country and its people heavily rely on its fishery and agricultural sectors. With the weather being tropically perfect and warm all year round, Fiji is known for producing delicious tropical fruits and hefty sugarcane cultivation. This brings us to the elephant in the room. How did Indians end up in Fiji? The migration of the first Indians to Fiji is a historical tale set in the 1870s and is a result of the British colonial rule in India and Fiji. In 1874, Fiji was ceded to the British Crown and became a colony controlled by Great Britain, much like the Indian subcontinent during the 1600s. At the time, the British Empire recognized Fiji's economic potential, especially in sugarcane cultivation, and so they chose to maximize production to earn more money by exporting Fijian agricultural products. However, it became evident that the local Fijian population wasn't going to fulfill the labor demands of the growing economy. To meet these demands and make more money, the British turned to India as a potential solution. Their plan was to recruit the growing Indian population to work as inexpensive plantation workers on sugarcane farms. The process of recruiting Indian laborers was conducted by agents or arkatis, who ventured into rural, economically challenged regions of India. These agents would persuade potential laborers to sign up for indentured labor in Fiji, promising them better wages and a happier lifestyle than what they had back home. Many young men and women signed up happily with big dreams for their future, but in reality, they did not know what awaited them on the other side of this trip. On May 15, 1879, the momentous journey began with the arrival of the Leonidas, a British ship that carried the first group of Indian laborers to Fiji. Approximately 60,000 Indians were aboard this cargo ship and had signed away 5 years in indentured labor contracts to the British government. The journey to Fiji was no easy feat. Indian laborers who consented to the contracts embarked on arduous voyages aboard British ships, with the journey sometimes taking several months. Conditions on these ships were far from ideal, and the laborers endured significant hardships during the passage. The promise was that life in Fiji would be nothing short of heavenly, and they would go back home to India as soon as their contracts were over. But when the Indian laborers reached Fiji, they realized they were brought in as disguised slaves to work in the worst of environments. The first Indians faced harsh and intolerable working conditions, wages so low they didn't cover living expenses like food, and no sense of freedom. Work was often physically demanding, along with the working hours spanning as long as 15 hours a day in extreme temperatures and with no breaks. And when the work was over, they had little huts to go nap in. Those who wished to return were forced to continue working, and life was miserable to say the least. While the initial contracts were typically for 5 years, they were later extended to 10 years. The British government kept bringing in new labor, and the existing Indians on the island couldn't warn anyone back home during this time, since they had no form of contact. It was finally in 1916 when indentured emigration was abolished by the British government after Mahatma Gandhi stepped in. Indians were finally free to go back home to their families and loved ones. They didn't have to put up with 15 hours of physical work or extreme living conditions. They had choices to make. Here's where it gets interesting. Most of the Indians chose to stay. So, why didn't Indians go back to India? Despite being miserable slaves in Fiji, Indians weren't able to move back home. The reason? Their pay was so low and their morale was so shattered that they couldn't afford to make the trip. No matter how much they wanted to see their families or live their normal lives before the indenture contracts, they had no choice but to stay in Fiji. But what they could do was get jobs with better pay and enjoy more freedom than they could with their old contracts, and so Fiji saw more and more Indians come to the country. Surprisingly, most of these weren't moving to work at the plantations like the previous Indians. Traders, doctors, businessmen, merchants, and even students were moving to study and work in Fiji. In many cases, entire families moved away from India to reunite with that one member who had signed the contracts with the British government. After all, the country was accepting Indians as local citizens with equal rights for their hard work and contributions to both society and the economy. And just like the Indians before them, a lot of shocks and reality checks were awaiting the newer Indians in Fiji. This time, it wasn't harsh working conditions, but rather the difference of culture, race, religion, and language. In short, it was the basics of society that would stand as a wall against the new immigrants. What culture shocks were waiting for Indians? The most obvious and painful culture shock for newcomer Indians was language. India is a culturally rich country with hundreds of diverse regional languages spoken by millions of people. Amongst the indentured labor, Hindi, Punjabi, and Gujarati were the most commonly understood and used languages. Since they had traveled in groups, most of these men and women chose to stick together and enjoy a sense of belonging with their peers. Yet in Fiji, the only language you could hear was English. Imagine how troubling this was to Indians who had elementary proficiency in English at best. Indians could understand the most basic commands, but daily life felt cut off thanks to the communication gap in the country. To preserve their own languages, educated Indians chose to build language schools and community groups as well as to celebrate their cultural events just as they would back home. Locally known as pathshalas, Indian schools were created to teach younger Indians every skill they needed to thrive in Fiji, from learning English skills and basic school subjects to passing down heritage stories, cultural beliefs, and their mother tongue. These schools were the powerhouse of the Indian community in Fiji. Let's talk about another culture shock they were facing. Indo-Fijians belonged to one of the four strong religious households: Hinduism, Islam, Sikhism, or Christianity. Each of these groups had a strong sense of religious duty and beliefs to the point that it was obvious in their day-to-day lives. You could recognize Sikhs by their turbans, Hindus by their holy statues, and even Muslims by their praying schedule and modest outfits. Indigenous Fijians were mostly Christians, and it was an undoubted fact that these religious and cultural differences would come to a head someday. However, Fijians and Indo-Fijians blended their beliefs, culture, traditions, and faithful practices quite beautifully. In fact, it is this blend that we see in Fiji's diverse cultural tapestry today. This begs the question: how did Indians impact Fiji, the economy, and famous Fijian Indians? The Indian community in Fiji has had a profound and lasting impact on the nation's economy and society since their arrival as indentured laborers in the late 19th century. One of the most significant contributions of the Indo-Fijian community has been in the economic sphere. Initially brought to Fiji to work on sugarcane plantations, the laborers laid the foundation for the sugarcane industry, which became a cornerstone of the Fijian economy. Today, sugar remains one of Fiji's top export products. According to the Fiji Sugar Corporation, the sugar industry contributed around 220 million Fijian dollars to Fiji's GDP in 2019 alone. Indo-Fijians have also made significant contributions to other sectors, including commerce, small businesses, and esteemed professions. Today, over 25% of Fiji's sugarcane plantation farms are owned by direct Indian descendants of the indentured workers. The Fijian economy isn't the only thing Indians impacted. From the early 20th century, as the indenture system ended, the Indo-Fijian community began to assert itself politically. Initially, they advocated for civil rights and fair treatment. In 1929, an Indo-Fijian physician named Manilal Doctor founded the Kisan Sangh, a political organization that represented the interests of Indo-Fijian farmers. This marked the beginning of organized political activity within the Indian community. The Indo-Fijian community established political parties to represent their interests and gain a voice in Fijian politics. The most prominent of these was the National Federation Party, founded in 1968. The NFP aimed to address the concerns of Indo-Fijians and other marginalized communities. Its leaders, including Jairam Reddy and Harish Sharma, played key roles in advocating for social justice and political inclusion. While the NFP primarily represented Indo-Fijian interests, it also fostered a multi-ethnic approach. The party worked to build coalitions with other ethnic groups, particularly the indigenous Fijian community, to create a broad-based political movement that emphasized unity and shared values. Indo-Fijians have played prominent roles in Fijian politics. Several Indo-Fijian leaders have held high-ranking positions, including becoming members of parliament and even serving as prime ministers. For example, Jairam Reddy was a prominent Indo-Fijian politician who served as the leader of the NFP and held various ministerial positions in the Fijian government. Similarly, Mahendra Chaudhry became Fiji's first Indo-Fijian prime minister in 1999. In recent years, Fiji has seen changes in its political landscape, including the adoption of a new constitution and general elections. Indo-Fijian political parties have continued to participate in the democratic process and have been openly welcomed as free and equal citizens, showing their progress since they first came to the island in 1879. Where are Indo-Fijians today? Over the decades, the Indo-Fijian community has evolved and diversified, and has made significant contributions to various aspects of Fijian life. Many Indo-Fijians continue to live in Fiji, particularly in urban centers like Suva, the capital, and Lautoka. They have established thriving communities, with a presence in various sectors of society, including business, education, healthcare, and politics. Indo-Fijians have also become an integral part of Fiji's multicultural identity, contributing to the nation's rich cultural tapestry. A significant number of Indo-Fijians have resettled in countries like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the United States, seeking better economic opportunities and political stability. These diaspora communities have retained their cultural ties to Fiji and have contributed to the global Indo-Fijian identity. In their new homelands, Indo-Fijians have continued to be active participants in the cultural, economic, and social life of their adopted countries. They have established cultural associations, places of worship, and community organizations, preserving their cultural heritage while integrating into the wider multicultural societies in their host countries. The Indo-Fijian diaspora plays an essential role in maintaining connections with Fiji. They often maintain strong ties with their families and communities back in Fiji and engage in philanthropic and charitable activities to support their home country. Remittances sent by the diaspora community have had a significant impact on Fiji's economy, contributing to household incomes, education, and healthcare access. If there's one thing for certain, it's that the Indo-Fijian resilience, strength, and sense of community remains unmatched. From their initial journey as British slaves from India to being successful and contributing members of the Fijian society, these ambassadors of India sure do prove their worth to the whole world. And this is the end of our video. If you liked hearing about the interesting history of Indians in Fiji, make sure you leave a like and subscribe. That way we'll book you a passenger seat on our upcoming video travels. In the meantime, check out this cool video right here.